A man claiming to be reunited with his long-lost daughter begins an inappropriate romantic relationship that shocks their small community. But when he goes live on Facebook to announce their engagement, what viewers witness leaves them horrified and calling police. 3 months later, detectives make a discovery that changes everything they thought they knew about this twisted case, revealing the most shocking truth about identity theft, manipulation, and one woman's desperate fight for survival. The quiet town of Riverside Falls had always been the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. With a population of just over 8,000 residents, gossip traveled faster than wildfire, and secrets were nearly impossible to keep. It was here, in the spring of 2022, that a man named David Clark arrived, claiming to search for his daughter. David appeared to be in his early 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to hold years of regret. He rented a small apartment above the local bakery on Main Street and immediately began his search. He visited the town library, posted flyers on community boards, and spoke to anyone who would listen about his lost daughter, Isabella. According to David, Isabella had been taken from him during a bitter custody battle nearly 20 years earlier. Her mother had moved away with her when she was just 8 years old, and despite his efforts, he had never been able to track them down. He carried with him old photographs of a young girl with dark curls and bright green eyes, showing them to anyone who might recognize her. The community of Riverside Falls had always been welcoming to newcomers, and David's heartbreaking tale of a father searching for his child touched many hearts. Local volunteers helped him create missing person posters, and the town's social media groups shared his plea for information. Everyone hoped that somehow, some way, David would find his daughter. 3 weeks after David's arrival, a young woman named Isabella Rodriguez walked into the local coffee shop where David had been spending most of his mornings. She was 27 years old, with the same dark curls and green eyes as the girl in his photographs, though aged by nearly 2 decades. When she saw David sitting alone at a corner table, something about him seemed familiar. Isabella had grown up in foster care after her mother died in a car accident when she was 9 years old. She had no clear memories of her father, only fragments of a man who used to read her bedtime tales and take her to the park. She had spent years wondering about her family, about where she came from, and whether anyone out there was looking for her. The coffee shop fell silent as David looked up from his newspaper and saw Isabella standing there. His face went pale, and his hands began to shake. The photograph he had been carrying slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. Isabella bent down to pick it up, and when she saw the image of herself as a child, tears began to stream down her face. What happened next seemed like something out of a movie. David stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. He whispered her name, and she nodded, unable to speak. The entire coffee shop watched as father and daughter embraced for the first time in nearly 20 years. There was not a dry eye in the place. The reunion became the talk of the town. Everyone wanted to hear about how David and Isabella were rebuilding their relationship. They were seen together constantly, walking through the park, sharing meals at local restaurants, and attending community events. David moved out of his small apartment and rented a house on Elm Street, inviting Isabella to stay with him so they could make up for lost time. Isabella, who had been working as a waitress at a diner in the next town over, quit her job and moved in with David. She told her few friends that she finally felt like she belonged somewhere, that she had found the family she had always been searching for. The father and daughter seemed inseparable, and the community celebrated their beautiful reunion. However, as the weeks passed, some residents began to notice things that made them uncomfortable. David and Isabella were always holding hands, even in situations where it seemed inappropriate. They would sit unusually close together at restaurants, and David would often put his arm around Isabella's waist in a way that seemed more romantic than paternal. Local resident Margaret Thompson first raised concerns when she saw them at the town's summer festival. She later told police that she watched David and Isabella dancing together during the live band performance, and their body language made her deeply uncomfortable. They were pressed close together, swaying to the music in a way that looked more like lovers than a father and daughter reunion. Other residents began to share similar observations. Rebecca Walsh, who worked at the local grocery store, mentioned that David and Isabella would often come in together and behave in ways that seemed romantic. They would feed each other samples from the deli counter, and David would whisper things in Isabella's ear that would make her blush and giggle. The rumors began to spread through Riverside Falls like a storm. People were divided. Some believed that David and Isabella were simply making up for lost time, and that their closeness was natural after being separated for so long. Others felt that something was deeply wrong with their relationship, but nobody wanted to be the one to voice their suspicions out loud. As summer turned to fall, the whispers in Riverside Falls grew louder. David and Isabella had been living together for several months, and their behavior had become increasingly difficult to ignore. They were no longer just holding hands or sitting close together. They were openly affectionate in ways that made longtime residents deeply uncomfortable. Pastor Robert Williams at the local Methodist church was one of the first to express his concerns directly. He had known David and Isabella would sometimes attend Sunday services together, and he noticed that they would sit in the back pew, holding hands throughout the entire service. During one particular sermon about family values, he watched them exchange looks that he later described as inappropriate for any father and daughter. After the service, Pastor Williams approached David privately in the church parking lot. He gently suggested that perhaps David and Isabella might benefit from some family counseling to help them navigate their unique situation. David's response was immediate and defensive. He told the pastor that nobody understood what they had been through, and that they were simply making up for 20 years of lost time. Isabella, who had been waiting by their car, joined the conversation. She stood close to David, almost possessively, and told Pastor Williams that she and her father had a special bond that nobody else could understand. She said that they had been through so much pain being separated, and now they were finally healing together. The pastor left that conversation feeling deeply troubled, but he was not sure what action to take. He spoke with his wife about the situation, and she encouraged him to keep an eye on the pair while being careful not to make false accusations. Meanwhile, at the local diner where Isabella used to work, her former co-workers were sharing their own concerns. Lisa Martinez, who had been Isabella's closest friend at the restaurant, revealed that Isabella had confided in her about having romantic feelings for someone. At the time, Lisa had assumed Isabella was talking about a boyfriend, but now she wondered if those feelings had been directed toward David. Lisa decided to reach out to Isabella directly. She called her former co-worker and suggested they meet for coffee to catch up. Isabella agreed, and they met at a cafe in the neighboring town to avoid the gossip mill of Riverside Falls. During their conversation, Lisa carefully broached the subject of Isabella's relationship with David. She asked how Isabella was adjusting to living with her father after so many years apart. Isabella's response was telling. She spoke about David with the kind of breathless admiration typically reserved for a romantic partner. Isabella told Lisa that David understood her in ways that nobody else ever had. She said that they shared a connection that went beyond typical family relationships, and that she had never felt so loved and cherished by anyone. When Lisa pressed her about whether their relationship was appropriate, Isabella became defensive and claimed that society did not understand their unique situation. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Isabella storming out of the cafe after Lisa suggested that she might want to speak with a counselor about her feelings. Lisa was left feeling more concerned than ever, but she was not sure who to turn to with her suspicions. Back in Riverside Falls, the situation continued to escalate. David and Isabella were seen at the local movie theater, sharing popcorn and sitting with their arms around each other during a romantic comedy. They attended the town's Halloween festival dressed as a couple rather than as family members, with Isabella wearing a costume that David had clearly helped her choose. The breaking point came in early November when David and Isabella attended a community potluck dinner at the town hall. They arrived together, with Isabella wearing a beautiful dress and David in his best suit. Throughout the evening, they behaved like a couple celebrating an anniversary rather than a father and daughter enjoying a community event. Several residents watched in horror as David fed Isabella bites of dessert from his own plate, and Isabella responded by kissing him on the cheek in a way that lingered far too long. When the DJ played a slow song, David and Isabella took to the dance floor and moved together in a way that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Margaret Thompson, who had been watching the pair all evening, finally decided she had seen enough. She approached David and Isabella on the dance floor and asked to speak with them privately. She led them to a quiet corner of the hall and directly confronted them about their behavior. Margaret told them that their relationship was inappropriate and that they were making the entire community uncomfortable. She suggested that they needed professional help to sort out their feelings and establish appropriate boundaries. David's response was immediate and angry. He told Margaret that she had no right to interfere in their family business. Isabella, however, seemed shaken by Margaret's words. For the first time, she appeared to question whether their relationship was normal. She asked Margaret what she meant by inappropriate, and Margaret explained that fathers and daughters do not behave romantically toward each other. The conversation ended with David grabbing Isabella's hand and pulling her away from Margaret. They left the potluck dinner immediately, but not before David loudly announced that he and Isabella were tired of being judged by small-minded people who did not understand their love for each other. His choice of words, their love for each other, sent shockwaves through the community. Within hours, the entire town was talking about what had happened at the potluck dinner. Some residents were horrified, while others wondered if they had been misinterpreting innocent behavior all along. The situation reached a boiling point when David made an announcement that would change everything. He told anyone who would listen that he and Isabella were planning to get married. He said that they had realized their feelings for each other went beyond family love, and that they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. The news spread through Riverside Falls like wildfire. Some residents were disgusted, while others were confused about the legal and moral implications of the situation. Pastor Williams immediately began researching the laws regarding marriage between family members, while other community leaders wondered if they should contact social services or law enforcement. On a cold December evening, David made a decision that would expose the truth about his relationship with Isabella in the most public way possible. He had grown tired of the whispers and judgment from the Riverside Falls community, and he wanted to make a statement that would silence his critics once and for all. David had been active on social media throughout his time in Riverside Falls, documenting his reunion with Isabella and defending their relationship against anyone who questioned it. His Facebook page was filled with photos of them together, accompanied by captions that described their unbreakable bond and pure love. He had attracted a following of people who were moved by their reunion, as well as critics who were disturbed by their behavior. On December 15th, David posted an announcement on his Facebook page that he would be going live that evening to make a special announcement about his future with Isabella. He promised that after his broadcast, nobody would be able to question their relationship ever again. The post was shared dozens of times within hours, drawing attention from people far beyond the borders of Riverside Falls. Isabella seemed nervous about the planned broadcast. Several neighbors later reported seeing her pacing back and forth in front of their house on Elm Street, talking on her phone in an agitated manner. When David called her inside, she appeared reluctant to join him, but eventually disappeared into the house. At 8 o'clock in the evening, David went live on Facebook from their living room. He had set up his phone to capture both himself and Isabella, who was sitting beside him on the couch. She appeared uncomfortable and kept glancing toward the door as if she wanted to leave. David began the broadcast by addressing his critics directly. He said that he was tired of people who did not understand the depth of his love for Isabella, and that he wanted to prove once and for all that their relationship was real and powerful. He spoke passionately about their reunion and how it had changed both of their lives. As David spoke, Isabella remained mostly silent, occasionally nodding when he looked at her but otherwise staring at her hands. Viewers in the live chat began commenting that she looked scared or uncomfortable, but David ignored their observations and continued with his announcement. Then David dropped the bombshell that would change everything. He announced that he and Isabella were not just planning to get married, they were planning to leave Riverside Falls together immediately after the broadcast. He said that they were going to disappear to a place where nobody could judge them or interfere with their relationship. The tone of David's voice changed as he made this announcement. What had started as a passionate defense of their love began to sound more like a threat. He said that if the community could not accept their relationship, then they would have to live without them entirely. He hinted that they might have to take drastic measures to ensure that nobody could ever separate them again. Isabella's behavior during this portion of the broadcast became increasingly concerning to viewers. She began shaking visibly, and when David reached over to take her hand, she pulled away from him. For the first time during the broadcast, she looked directly at the camera, and her eyes seemed to be pleading for help. David noticed Isabella's behavior and became agitated. He began speaking faster and more erratically, saying that Isabella was just nervous about starting their new life together. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her closer to him, despite her obvious discomfort. The live chat exploded with comments from viewers who were becoming increasingly alarmed by what they were witnessing. Many people began asking if Isabella was okay, and some suggested that someone should call the police. David seemed to be reading the comments, and his mood became darker as he saw the negative reactions. What happened next shocked everyone watching the broadcast. David suddenly stood up and walked off camera, leaving Isabella alone and visible to the hundreds of viewers. She looked around frantically, as if debating whether to run or stay. When she thought David was out of earshot, she whispered something that made viewers' blood run cold. "He is not my father," Isabella said quietly, looking directly at the camera. "Please help me." Before she could say anything else, David returned to the frame carrying what appeared to be a suitcase. He seemed agitated and was muttering to himself about people who did not understand their love. He told Isabella that it was time to leave and that they needed to go immediately. Isabella stood up slowly, her hands shaking. She looked at the camera one more time and mouthed the word help before David grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. The broadcast continued for several more minutes, showing only an empty living room, while viewers could hear David's voice in the background, becoming increasingly aggressive. The audio captured David telling Isabel that they were going to a place where nobody could find them and that if anyone tried to stop them, they would regret it. Isabella could be heard crying and pleading with David to let her go, but her voice was becoming fainter as they moved away from the phone. Then the broadcast ended abruptly, leaving hundreds of viewers staring at their screens in shock and horror. Within minutes, the Riverside Falls Police Department began receiving calls from people who had watched the live broadcast. The officers who took the initial reports were skeptical. The callers were reporting a potential kidnapping based on a Facebook Live video, but as more calls came in, they realized they needed to take the situation seriously. Detective Carlos Rodriguez arrived at the house on Elm Street within 30 minutes of the broadcast ending. He found the front door unlocked and the house empty, with clear signs that someone had left in a hurry. Isabella's purse was on the kitchen counter, and there were clothes scattered on the bedroom floor as if someone had packed quickly. Most disturbing was what Detective Rodriguez found in David's bedroom. Hidden in a dresser drawer were documents that would change everything they thought they knew about David and Isabella's relationship. The detective immediately called for backup and began what would become one of the most shocking investigations in Riverside Falls history. Detective Rodriguez's discovery in David's bedroom would expose a web of lies and deception that went far beyond what anyone in Riverside Falls could have imagined. Hidden beneath a stack of clothing in the dresser drawer were documents that revealed the shocking truth about David Clark and his relationship with Isabella Rodriguez. The first document that caught Detective Rodriguez's attention was a death certificate dated 3 years earlier. The certificate was for a man named David Michael Clark, who had died in a car accident in Phoenix, Arizona. The man who had been living in Riverside Falls was not David Clark at all. He was someone else entirely, someone who had stolen a dead man's identity. Further investigation revealed that the imposter's real name was Robert Franklin Mitchell, a 49-year-old man with a criminal history that included charges for identity theft, fraud, and stalking. Mitchell had been released from prison just 6 months before he arrived in Riverside Falls, and he had immediately begun planning his most elaborate scheme yet. The documents found in the dresser told the complete tale of Mitchell's deception. He had obtained David Clark's personal information after the real David's death, including his social security number, birth certificate, and other identifying documents. Mitchell had then researched David's life and discovered that he had indeed been searching for his daughter Isabella before his death. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Among the documents was a folder containing detailed information about Isabella Rodriguez, including her address, work schedule, and personal background. Mitchell had been stalking Isabella for months before he ever set foot in Riverside Falls, learning everything he could about her life and her history. The truth about Isabella's background was heartbreaking. She had never been David Clark's daughter at all. Her real father had died when she was very young, and her mother had remarried a man named Rodriguez whose last name Isabella had taken. Isabella had grown up believing that her biological father had abandoned her, never knowing that he had actually died in military service overseas. Mitchell had discovered Isabella through social media, where she had posted about her desire to find her biological father. He had spent months studying her photos and learning about her life, crafting the perfect story to manipulate her into believing that he was her long-lost father. The resemblance between Isabella and the girl in the photographs was purely coincidental. Mitchell had chosen Isabella specifically because she fit the physical description of David Clark's real daughter. Detective Rodriguez immediately put out an alert for Robert Mitchell and Isabella Rodriguez. The FBI was contacted due to the interstate nature of the crimes, and within hours, law enforcement agencies across the region were searching for the missing pair. The investigation revealed that Mitchell had been planning this scheme for months. He had rented the house on Elm Street using David Clark's stolen identity, and he had even practiced his story about searching for his daughter. His goal had been to manipulate Isabella into believing that she was his daughter, then gradually groom her into a romantic relationship. The Facebook Live broadcast had been Mitchell's way of trying to isolate Isabella completely from her support system. By announcing that they were leaving town together, He had hoped to take her somewhere where she would be completely dependent on him and unable to escape. But Isabella's whispered plea for help during the broadcast had given law enforcement the evidence they needed to understand what was really happening. Meanwhile, the search for Mitchell and Isabella intensified. Police tracked Mitchell's movements through surveillance cameras and credit card transactions, following their trail as they headed north toward the Canadian border. It became clear that Mitchell had been planning this escape route for weeks, as he had strategically placed supplies and cash along the way. The investigation also revealed that Isabella had been trying to escape from Mitchell for weeks before the Facebook Live incident. Phone records showed that she had been calling a domestic violence hotline, trying to understand why she felt uncomfortable with her supposed father's behavior. She had also been researching online about inappropriate family relationships, desperately trying to understand why something felt so wrong about their situation. Isabella's former co-worker, Lisa Martinez, came forward with additional information after seeing the news coverage. She revealed that Isabella had called her several times in the weeks leading up to the Facebook broadcast, expressing confusion about her feelings for David and asking for advice. Lisa had urged Isabella to seek professional help, but Isabella had been too afraid to defy David's wishes. The community of Riverside Falls was reeling from the revelation that they had been deceived by Mitchell for months. Many residents felt guilty for not speaking up sooner about their concerns, while others were horrified that they had been fooled by such an elaborate scheme. The town's trust had been shattered, and everyone was desperate to know what had happened to Isabella. Pastor Williams, who had tried to intervene earlier, spoke to reporters about the situation. He explained that he had sensed something was wrong with David and Isabella's relationship from the beginning, but he had not wanted to make false accusations about a family reunion. He urged other community leaders to trust their instincts when they sensed that something was not right. The investigation continued around the clock, with law enforcement agencies working together to track down Mitchell and rescue Isabella. They discovered that Mitchell had a pattern of targeting vulnerable women who were searching for missing family members, and that Isabella was not his first victim. However, none of his previous schemes had been as elaborate or long-lasting as his deception in Riverside Falls. As the search entered its second day, investigators received a break in the case that would lead them directly to Mitchell and Isabella. A gas station attendant in a small town near the Canadian border called police to report a suspicious interaction she had witnessed between a man and a woman who matched the descriptions of the missing pair. The gas station attendant, Maria Santos, had been working the night shift when Mitchell and Isabella arrived at her station just after midnight. She immediately noticed that something was wrong with the situation. The woman appeared frightened and kept looking around as if she was searching for a way to escape. Maria had seen the news coverage about the missing pair and recognized them immediately. She pretended to process their transaction normally while secretly pressing the panic button that would alert police to her location. She also managed to get a clear view of the license plate on Mitchell's vehicle, which she quickly memorized. When Mitchell went to use the restroom, leaving Isabella alone in the store, Maria saw her opportunity. She approached Isabella and quietly asked if she needed help. Isabella's response was immediate and desperate. She whispered that she was being held against her will and begged Maria to call the police. Maria assured Isabella that help was already on the way, and she advised her to stay calm and not let Mitchell know that she had asked for help. Isabella nodded and tried to compose herself before Mitchell returned from the restroom. When he came back, Maria completed their transaction as normally as possible, all while knowing that police were racing to her location. Mitchell and Isabella left the gas station and continued driving north, unaware that law enforcement was closing in on their location. Within 20 minutes, multiple police vehicles surrounded their car on a quiet stretch of highway, bringing Mitchell's scheme to an end. The arrest was captured on dash camera footage that would later be used in court. Mitchell initially tried to maintain his false identity, insisting that he was David Clark and that Isabella was his daughter who was simply having a mental health crisis. However, when confronted with the evidence that had been discovered in his house, Mitchell's lies quickly crumbled. Isabella was immediately taken to a local hospital for evaluation, where she was treated for dehydration and emotional trauma. She was also provided with counseling services to help her process the psychological manipulation she had endured over the past several months. During her recovery, Isabella revealed the full extent of Mitchell's manipulation. She explained that she had begun to suspect something was wrong with their relationship within weeks of moving in with him, but Mitchell had been skilled at making her question her own instincts. He had told her that her discomfort was normal for someone who had grown up without a father, and that their close relationship was simply the result of their strong bond. Isabella also revealed that Mitchell had been gradually isolating her from her support system. He had convinced her to quit her job and cut contact with her friends, telling her that nobody else could understand their unique situation. He had also been monitoring her phone calls and internet usage, making it difficult for her to seek help. The turning point had come when Isabella realized that Mitchell's behavior toward her was not paternal at all, it was predatory. She had begun researching online about inappropriate family relationships and had discovered that what Mitchell was doing to her was a form of abuse. She had started making secret phone calls to domestic violence hotlines, trying to understand her situation and plan her escape. The Facebook Live broadcast had been Isabella's desperate attempt to get help. When Mitchell announced that they were leaving town immediately, she realized that it might be her last chance to alert someone to her situation. Her whispered plea for help during the broadcast had been incredibly brave, and it had ultimately saved her life. Mitchell was charged with multiple crimes, including identity theft, fraud, kidnapping, and stalking. The investigation revealed that he had been planning the scheme for over a year, and that Isabella was not his first victim. However, his deception in Riverside Falls had been his most elaborate and long-lasting scheme. During the trial, Isabella testified about her experience with courage and strength that inspired everyone in the courtroom. She explained how Mitchell had manipulated her desire to find her family and used it against her, and how she had gradually realized that something was terribly wrong with their relationship. The community of Riverside Falls rallied around Isabella during her recovery. Local residents organized fundraisers to help her get back on her feet, and many people apologized for not intervening sooner when they suspected something was wrong. The town also implemented new programs to help residents recognize the signs of abuse and manipulation. Isabella used her experience to help other victims of similar crimes. She began working with law enforcement agencies to train officers on how to recognize elaborate manipulation schemes, and she spoke at community events about the importance of trusting one's instincts when something feels wrong. The case also led to changes in how missing persons cases are handled, particularly when they involve family reunions. Law enforcement agencies now have better protocols for verifying the identities of people who claim to be long-lost family members, and social media companies have implemented new measures to prevent live broadcasts from being used to commit crimes. Mitchell was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his crimes. During his sentencing, the judge noted that his scheme had been particularly heinous because it had exploited Isabella's desire to find her family and had caused her to question her own instincts and judgment. Isabella eventually moved to a new city where she could start fresh, but she maintained contact with several friends from Riverside Falls who had supported her during her ordeal. She completed her education and began working as a counselor, helping other victims of manipulation and abuse. The case became a powerful reminder that predators can be skilled at creating elaborate deceptions and that it is important to trust one's instincts when something feels wrong. Isabella's bravery in asking for help during the Facebook Live broadcast saved her life and helped prevent Mitchell from victimizing other vulnerable women. Isabella's incredible survival shows us that even in the darkest situations, there is always hope for escape and recovery. Her courage to speak up during that Facebook Live broadcast, despite her fear, ultimately saved her life and brought a dangerous predator to justice. This case teaches us several important lessons about recognizing manipulation and protecting ourselves from those who would exploit our deepest needs and desires. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you cannot immediately explain why. Reach out for help when you feel isolated or controlled by someone else. And remember that true family relationships are built on respect, appropriate boundaries, and genuine love, not manipulation and control. If you or someone you know is experiencing manipulation or abuse, please reach out for help. There are resources available, including the National Domestic Violence Hotline and local counseling services. Remember that you are not alone, and there are people who want to help you escape dangerous situations. What do you think about Isabella's incredible bravery? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to trust your instincts despite pressure from others? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex for more true crime tales that remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest cases. And remember, your intuition might just save your life.